Hello everyone, welcome to the Tech Geek webinar. Thank you for joining the session today. The topic for today's talk is learn about the latest features from UiPath Activity Creator and Workflow Analyzer. It'll be a 1.5 hour session with around 40 to 45 minutes for the presentation for each speaker and the remaining time for the Q&A. So if you have any questions, please send them to us using the questions tab on the GoToWebinar control panel. Our guest speakers will take up the questions right after each presentation today. I'm Sukriti, the moderator of this session, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our guest speakers, Dean Morrow, Integrations Lead, and Mircea Grigore, Development Tools Product Lead from UiPath. Our speaker, Mircea, is a developer and a UXer by heart. As a product lead at UiPath, Mircea is responsible for building and designing development tools for authorizing process automation. Our second speaker, Dean, started at UiPath about 2.5 years ago and as an RPA developer, and now heads the engineering team that creates third-party integrations with the company's core platform. The team has recently built an activity creator in an effort to make it easier for everyone out in the UiPath community to do the same. So without any further delay, let me introduce you to our guest speakers. Over to you, Mircea.
Thank you, Sukriti. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for everyone who is today with us. I would like to thank TechGeek for giving us this opportunity to share with you a bit about what is new in the UiPath world. I would also want to introduce Bogdan Toma, who is a surprise guest speaker today. He is our senior lead developer and is coordinating the entire development tools suite at UiPath, and he will help me present the first section, which will be about workflow analyzer. So today in the agenda, I will be talking very briefly about what is UiPath Studio. Then we will talk about how to build the workflow analyzer rule, and Bogdan will actually show you that by how to code a rule. And then Dean will present how to actually code a custom activity that you can use to build automation. So what is automations? We believe that in today's world, automation is an important part. We believe automation is here to stay. We also believe that automation is for everybody, and we want to democratize this. And for that, we've built a series of development tools that can be used by all types of users. We have a Studio X, which was launched 1 week ago, actually this week, which can be used by citizen developers, we call them, but basically these are users that do not require any technical background. We have our almost famous Studio, which can be used by RPA developers. This has been launched for more than 5 years now. And we've also introduced this week an enhanced version of Studio, which can be used by RPA professionals, which comes bundled with more features and capabilities than Studio offers, like test automation, building test cases, and application testing. If you want to learn more about UiPath, about Studio, how to build automations, how to become an RPA developer, you can always reach out to us on our forum. We have a big open community today, which you can join for free. You can go ahead and download Studio from cloud.uipath.com. You can browse our documentation, or you can even register and learn our tools for free and learn how to become an RPA developer and build automations. So to not take too much of your time and to skip directly to the hands-on demos, let me talk a little bit about workflow analyzer. So if you're not familiar with Studio, this is how Studio for RPA developers looks today. It's an IDE that you can use to build automations. You do that by basically assembling Lego pieces. It's like visual programming. And each automation is composed of a series of actions. And these actions can enable you to do actions on a screen inside an application and so on and so forth. I won't go too much into details. I'm just going to say that I prepared a small naive automation that I can demo for you today just to see an example of how things work. So I have here a process, an automation that basically goes to a site. Let me actually run this for you. It goes to a site and it compiles your unicorn name. So let's see it in action. If I run this, it will open a web page. It will type my name. It will select the month I was born, and it will tell me that my unicorn name is Violet Cloud Jumper. Okay, so let's do this in slow motion. If I hit debug, you will see that it will start doing each action slower. It will type my name. It will then add my birth month. It will get the name, and it will display it for me. That's that. So, but in the world of programming, you need if you are probably familiar with the fact that there is static code analysis. So we have that static code analysis basically helps you find issues with your code and gives you best practices around it and teaches you how to change it to make it more reliable, to respect the code conventions that you have within the team. And we've done exactly that within Studio as well. In the top ribbon of Studio, there is a button called Analyze File, and there's also an option to analyze the entire project. If I click this, it will basically analyze the current file that I have open and will give me a series of recommendations. And if you can see, each of these recommendations have an ID. We call these workflow analyzer rules. So what do these rules say? So in my example, I have a few code violations. It tells me that I have a display name duplication. It tells me that I'm not using that I'm using activity name defaults or generics, and it is a good practice to name all of these actions individually and separately and differentiate between them so that others, when they look at your code, can understand what you've built here. So what happens if I run the entire analysis on top of the entire project? If I do this, then I can see that there are multiple results given to me. So it also gives me the information that I have, that I'm using a package which is restricted by my workflow analyzer rule convention. So it tells me that I am using UiPath mobile automation activities, which you can see in the project panel on the left-hand side. So here it is right here. What else? It also tells me that, hey, you're using some dependencies to this project. So this is the list of dependencies right here. I have added them to my project, but I'm not actually using them. So I'm not using any of the activities that are shipped by these dependencies. Just a small note here, dependencies can ship activities. And if I want to learn more about how these workflow analyzers rules are configured, I can actually go to the project settings area and I can inspect each of these rules to see what they mean. I can go to the documentation. I can even sort. So for example, if I want to learn more about this package restrictions rule, how it was configured, as you can see here, it appears that only this mobile automation package is a restricted package or prohibited package. And without further ado, I have Bogdan with me that I mentioned in the beginning, who will teach us how to actually build a custom role, a workflow analyzer role. And then after Bogdan, we will have Dean, who will show us how to build one of these activities, a custom activities. Why would you build a custom role or a custom activity? Well, maybe you have something that is particular to you. You want some sort of analysis to do, and that analysis would require a rule that is not shipped out of the box. While we ship while we actually ship with each iteration more and more rules, it takes time for us to ship all and cover all the scenarios in the world. And this is why we wanted to build an extensible platform and an extensible product. So you as a developer can build all of these pieces and deploy them inside your organization. Like I said, without further ado, I would like to pass this presentation now to my colleague Bogdan Toma, who is the lead senior developer for all studio products.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bogdan. I will now show you how to build yourself a custom world. First of all, I would very much like to ask everybody to read this help page we got in our studio guide. It will explain somewhat how to configure in the code and how to build your role. But now I will effectively show you how to do it. The one thing to note about custom rules is how do you deploy them? So at the moment, as Micha said, one way is to encapsulate your rules into an activity package. And then when you install that activity pack, you'll notice in the dependencies area, you'll have that pack installed, and the rules that were shipped with that activity pack are also added to your project. Another way is to copy your DLL into the rules folder inside the installation directory. This is how we are going to do today. This means the rule is going to be available for all the projects in your installation, your local installation. In the roadmap, we have a cleaner way of doing this. You'll be able to add NuGet package containing rules for the whole studio, not for a certain project. But moving on, in order to do this, you'll need to start a new Visual Studio project. So our recommended way of doing this is to work with Visual Studio 2019. You'll need to build a new class library, a C#, and it needs to be .NET Framework 4.6.1. It can be .NET Framework 4.5.2, but nothing lower. .NET Framework 4.6.1 is recommended. So I'm going to call it webinar library. Okay, in order to access all the rules API, you need to import the Studio Activities API that we as Studio team are exporting to the public. This can be found inside the official UiPath feed, the MyGet feed. So when you go to the NuGet packages, you need to add this feed, the UiPath official MyGet workflow, and then search in this feed for the UiPath Studio API, UiPath Activities API. So this is the 20.4 version that was released on May the 5th, last week. And I'm going to install this. Okay, this is our first step. As you can see, it will add some UiPath assemblies as a dependency to my DLL. And now, what are we interested is in the UiPath Studio Activities API. In the UiPath Activities API part of this whole API package, we have some namespaces which are of interest for us. One of them is the analyzer rules. And how does this work? You will need to implement this interface in your in your, sorry, the e-register analyzer configuration is e-register analyzer configuration. I don't see why I don't see it here, but let's move ahead. So you need an implementation of an e-register analyzer configuration in your this implementation is called when your activities, your rules library is brought into the analyzer process. So the point of this function call is to give you an endpoint in which you can add your rules and your counters to Studio project. Now, let's call this rule repository. Okay. And implement this method. Okay. Now, the object that we get here, the workflow analyzer configuration service, has methods for you to add a rule and to add a counter. Also, it has a has feature method that provides you with a safety mechanism to check if a certain feature is supported. You'll notice along this demo that this has feature requirement is needed on certain properties. I will show you along the way. But for the moment, let's do a safety check, because the latest analyzer feature that we support is v4. So we'll start with a safety check. And this is our constant we need to use here. And basically we say that if the studio that is loading this library doesn't has the analyzer v4, we should return, because we basically need it for this demo. So the point of this demo now is to create two rules. One of them is very simple. Let's say that if you have a variable here, and you want this rule to look at the variable name and search for some string, and it should give you an error if that name contains the configured string. So we want to add a parameter like this one, which will be a string that the user can define. And for all the variables in your workflow, it will look at the name and see if the name contains that configured string. Okay. Now we will, for this, we will need to add a rule to the workflow configuration service. And this type of rule requires an inspection object. The way that inspection object works is we configured the three levels: the activity level, the workflow level, and the project level. Each one of these levels is more fine-grained than the other. So if you configure, if you want to add a rule for activity model, you will basically get this rule that you add here invoked for each activity in your workflow. So if you look at this workflow, you have one sequence, two sequence, three sequence, four sequence in the right line. So there are 5 activities. You will get 5 invocation for your rule. If you define your rule as a e-workflow model rule, then you'll get an invocation for each workflow that you have in your project. And of course, if you do it for the project model, you'll get a single invocation because this you can have only one project. Now, want to add an activity rule because variables are stored inside an activity, and it requires for you to provide the rule that you want to add. So we'll start by creating a new rule. And when you create a new rule, there are some aspects you need to consider. First of all, the rule name is the name that will be displayed inside Studio. So this should be a human readable name, so not variables. Then you need to provide an ID. Now, this ID is the ID that Mitya showed you earlier, and it's this one, the code. Now, the code is something that needs to be unique in the Studio installation. So we've chosen a pattern that it's comprised of 3 groups. The first group is the provider. So if it's ST, it's Studio. If it's UI, then it's the UI automation package, etc. For the purpose of this demo, I'll put DE for demo, I guess. Then the next group, it's split into what is that rule it's about. This ID is free text, so you can basically put everything. But I'll put USG from usage and then a number just to stay in line with the other rules. So I'll put the USG 1. And then this is the function that we need to provide for this rule. So this function will be called whenever this rule needs to be invoked. If we look at the signature, we need a function that returns an inspection results and receives as parameters activity model and the rule. I'll get into that in a moment. So I'll create results, inspect variable. And this is to inspect the rule is configured. Rule. Now, this function will be called each time the rule not allowed in variables is invoked. So for each activity in each workflow, this function will get a hit. The rule that you received in argument is the exact same rule you register here, but it is populated with whatever the user has configured in his UI. So if we look here, like this has a parameter. We'll add a parameter right now. You can have default values configured in code, but when the user selects something here, then this is where you'll get your parameters. So right now, we're gonna configure our rule. I want to add it in the configuration service. Okay. And we configure our rule. The applicable scopes field needs refers to what flavor of Studio this rule works in. If you leave it empty, it will be visible into all Studio. We want to touch this default error level, which will say that this will trigger an error whenever this rule is broken. We also want to add a parameter to it. So the parameter we want to add means will represent the string that the user can configure and is the string that is going to be searched inside variable names. So this parameter adding requires a key. So the parameter key will be string in variable. And then you can add a new parameter, which is a class also provided in the API. And this parameter allows the following options. The constraint regex that will be applied to the parameter field inside the configuration screen. Default value. So I'll add a default value. And this default value will be a demo. So basically you will not be able to have variables that contain the demo string in them. The key is repeated. This is done for legacy purposes, unfortunately. Maybe it's a key point for us to remove. And a localized display name. So in order to give this parameter a display name that needs to be localized, it will follow Studio's culture. So I'll put here illegal string. And that's about it. Okay, this takes care of the rule configuration as the rule, and now we need to tackle the actual function that will inspect each activity. So the purpose of our rule is to look at each activity and to see if it has a variable, and if that variable of variables contains this string, then we should give an error. How we do this? First, we need to look at the parameters that are configured by the user to see what we're looking for. So to do this, we need to look at the parameters, and this is a dictionary. We can get a string variable out of here. And we need to now look at the value field. This would be the configured string. It would be better to use to be safe, because these are also coming from governance files, and the user can't leave it empty. So we need to do some checks in order to be sure that our rules are as solid as possible. If one rule throws an error, the analyzer keeps going, but it's better to be safe than sorry. So as a return value, we need to return basically that nothing is wrong with this activity in this case, because there is no configure string, so basically all activities are okay. So we return a new inspection result with has error false. This will be almost an exit strategy from this function. Now we start looking at the activity to inspect. So the activity to inspect, the activity model, is a representation of an activity in Studio. It has a type, but it's a string, because you cannot know in the analyzer process the exact type. And this is the type assembly qualified name. It has a collection of variables, the collection of delegate arguments, properties, and other activities that are children of these activities. It also holds a reference to the parent for easier navigation, and the activities in scope. So for example, if I'm expecting this red line, it will have in scope all the activities from all the parents. So these variables defined in the sequence, plus these variables, plus these variables, and so on. Object references, this is used for object browser, a feature that we didn't release yet. So, and we released actually in community. It's available in community. You can have rules that are also look into those. But now, moving on. So basically, we need to check if our variables contains those illegal strings. We'll basically look first if we have some variables. So we'll do a quick exit if there are no variables defined here. And now we'll actually look at them. And this is pretty straightforward. We basically look at their display name. Now, if we found one of these variables that breaks our rule, we need to return a message to the user that will say your variable has broken the rule. We need to consider that this a certain activity, like this sequence, can have more than one variable. So if we inspect an activity, we need to be able to return more than one message for each activity. So the plan here is to create a list of messages which will be used to return. And we'll add here a new message for each breaking of the rule. And let's say that I want to say that the variable contains this illegal string. Okay. Okay. Now, basically, after we inspect all the variables, our next point is to see if we have something in the list and return appropriately. So so for this, we need to create a new inspection result. And this inspection result needs to have, first, it has errors. That's why we're doing this. Second of all, the messages should be the message list that we created above. And the inspection messages will be the messages that we created above. Then we can put a recommendation message to this, like fix your naming. And now, this one final thing is that you need to assign an error level. And you'll not be assigning the default error level because the user can go inside Studio and change his error level from whatever you put as default. So you need to get this out of the configured rule. And put it into the inspection results. Of course, you can override this. So you can say that your rules always return an error, but that would break the point of having it configured by the user. Okay. And in any other circumstance, we'll return the no error. So this is basically it. We have this rule repository that implements e-register analyze configuration. This implementation will assure us that our initialize function will be called. We'll check for the analyzer engine version. And then we'll add our rule, not loading variables, default error level, parameter, and the inspection function. This inspection function looks at the parameter and then looks at the variables. Okay, let's build this. Okay, build succeeded. We'll not go and in the output and take it out of here, bin debug the webinar library, and we'll paste it in the rules. Okay, so what we need to do now, I think only if we close and reopen the project, it should be visible here. Let me, yep, there it is, not allowed in variables. So the default demo string that we had here can now be changed to something else, and I'll put it in this test. Okay, and let me see that I think I had some variables here that breaks this rule. Okay, and if I click analyze files, yep, I get a message. Variable test contains an illegal string, and this is test. And I think the recommendation would be visible in this fixture naming if we expand this. So basically, this is how you create a very simple rule. The power of an analyzer goes even further because you can now change and work on a different type of model, like an workflow model. And when you look at the workflow model, it has a root. It also has the arguments and the namespaces. And then by looking and expanding the root, you can walk down the activity tree and look at each activity individually. So you have more options, like we have in Studio, the nesting level rule that looks at how deep, how many sequences you've got inside the workflow, or you can look at ifs that don't have an else filled in, etc. This gives you more options. Also, if you go to and add project rule, project level rule, then you get information about the project itself. You get an workflow model as an entry point. You get a collection of other workflow models, which are all the workflows in your project. And then also get information about the project itself. What's the project name? What are other files in the project besides workflow models? What's the dependencies and all the properties of the current project? Be aware that the activity model rule needs to be fast, so you cannot do too much age because it's called for each activity in each workflow inside your project. So you need to code with speed in mind. You don't need to do heavy operations, a lot of complex type matching in here. You need to be as fast as possible. As you go up in the scope, let's say if you do a project model rule, then you can do some heavy operation because this is called only once per project. And of course, in between the workflow model, this is called once per file. So you can get away with heavier operation, but the activity model one is the one that needs to be very careful about how time consuming it is, because that time will be reflected in the analysis time. I think I'll stop here with the presentation to allow time for Dean as well. I had in plan of presenting another rule, but based on the time we took for me to present this one, I think I'll run over my time. if there are any questions that you want me to answer, I think I can take them now.
Yes, Bogdan, we already have a lot of questions and I have assigned it to Mircea. He's been answering some of them. Would you also like to take them?
Yes.
Okay. So I've just shared one. I'm just sharing one by one with you also. You can just start taking them and answer them verbally, right?
Okay, so I'll read it. Can we selectively disable the default?
You can just check the questions tab. You can just check the questions tab.
So there are 3 more not answered.
Okay, got it. Do I need to create request to add the export? But it is available with Visual Studio Community Edition. Let me. So first question that I'll just present it. UiPath Studio, is it available with Visual Studio Community Edition? So UiPath Studio, it's a separate product. It's something that you get from UiPath. Visual Studio is something you get from Microsoft. They're two different. Can we do all of this in Visual Studio Code? I think Visual Studio Standalone would be much better. You'll probably need the Workflow Foundation, which I think is not available in Visual Studio Code. Can we selectively disable the default rule? We basically want to disable some of the rule and push across our studio. Yes, you can do that. So when you go to Workflow Project Analyzer settings in here, you can choose whatever selection. And there is another feature that will not present here, governance, that can be used to push it in the organization. Do I need to create request to add export feature for analyzer report? Exporting is on our roadmap. It will be done for all the rules that were ran. So there won't be nothing that you need to write in your custom rule. Maybe we'll add a new field in the expression result related to formatting when you do exporting. The formatting that you have today in the error list might not be suitable for exporting. UiPath free courses will provide certificate or not? I don't know how to answer this one. In UiPath free courses will provide certificate. Where can we get the information to create one? I mean, the detail level steps for a layman. So there is already a page here in UiPath Studio documentation, how to build custom rules, which can work through the steps of making a rule work. Otherwise, we have a forum from com.uipath.com. You can join the forum and ask questions here, and we, as contributors, are present on the forum. Okay. So if that is all.
There was another question, somebody asking if we can actually publish today's example, and maybe we can do that in the section where we explain how to build a custom rule.
Yeah, we will definitely put it in our documents. I've seen another question here. Where is the assembly deployment folder? Yes, it's inside the installation directory. So if you have installed Studio with the MSI via an enterprise license, you will need to put it inside C program files. If you install the community edition, the exe installer, it will be in the local app data. So you'll need to basically investigate where your Studio is installed, and inside there will be a subfolder called rules. System diagnostics is, we use system diagnostics trace level because this is a Microsoft-based enum. So we don't need to redefine our enumeration once more. It basically has whatever we need: info, warning, error, and why not off as well. Okay. Okay, I think this is about it. Can I think Dean can go now?
All right. Thanks, Bogdan. I hope everyone can see my screen here. So the next piece of this webinar is going to be on actually building the activities that Mircea and Bogdan were talking about. You know how to check workflows, make sure that they're clean and according to best practices. Now let's take a step back and figure out how to build building blocks of a workflow, these activities here. So what we've done in order to help you guys with this is we've built a Visual Studio extension, which we call the Activity Creator. And the hope is that if you've built activities before, this will lessen the boilerplate that you have to create. It'll make the process a whole lot easier. And if you haven't built activities before, my hope is that you can see it's actually quite simple. So what I'd like to do is walk through how to build a very simple activity, a calculator activity that just adds two numbers together. It's our classic example. And step one to that is going to a clean version of Visual Studio 2019 and up. 2017 has a bit of a different SDK to it, so you will need 2019. But to start, go to Extensions and Manage Extensions. And you can find our Activity Creator right in here. Search online in the Visual Studio Marketplace and you'll find the UiPath Activity Creator. Install that, I already have it in, and we're set to start building an activity. So there are two steps to this. First, create the project structure for an activity package, and then second, add some activities to it. Real simple. So to start, I'm going to go to File, New Project, and if you search for UiPath again, just give it a little minute. There we go. You'll see that there's a UiPath standard activity project which comes with that extension we have installed. Click Next, and this will be the name of your activity package as you see it in UiPath Studio. The standard convention here is to name it whatever your company is, whatever your product is. I'm just going to say test company, and we'll make a calculator. We're all done. It fills in the framework, the solution name, click create, and it's going to spit out the structure of an activity project. Here we go. You can see there's quite a lot in here, which is why we wanted a file picker that you can put in an activity to the base class of the activity itself, more boilerplate on the back end that you don't necessarily want to write yourselves. And then the second piece of this is the actual activity itself. It's broken up into 3 projects just to make things a little more organized. This middle one ends in activities. This is the execution logic. We put in here is what gets executed when you hit play in UiPath Studio. This piece down here, the design project, is what you actually see when you drag an activity into UiPath Studio here. It's the icon, the name, any fields that are in here. This is where you design it. And this first one here, this is what I call the auxiliary project. If you want to put in HTTP clients, any enums, classes, this is really just a grab bag of useful stuff that can be used by the other two main projects. But anyway, we have our structure. Let's add an activity to it that will add two numbers together. To do that, you select any one of these three projects so that the extension knows where we want to look. Go back up to the extensions menu. You'll see you have a UiPath menu here. Click Add Activities. And we have our activity creation wizard come up. We have two options here, create from scratch and import. We're going to go through the manual method of creating by scratch, but at any point while you're doing this, you can export a JSON file with an name it addition, give it a description, an activity in here in Studio. You can see it tells you what it does. We have two types here, simple and scope. You might be familiar with the scope if you've ever used our Excel activities. You drag in the Excel scope, it takes in a file, and then that file can be used for all of its child activities. I won't go through that now, but it's the same process. We're just going to keep it simple for now. Properties, we'll get to in a minute. Timeout, you can see this on some UiPath activities, like the click activity. Let's see. Where if the activity doesn't complete in a certain amount of time, it will time out and throw an error. It's just a nice option that we wanted to add in there for you. And last one, an icon. When you drag in an activity, you can see in the top corner there's an icon. It's a way of making them a lot more appealing. I'll add one here. I have a plus icon. And we're all set with the activity. Let's give it some properties, which are, of course, these things in the properties pane, all the inputs to the activities that tell it what information it's going to use when it executes. We have a very similar wizard here. I'm going to add three properties, two inputs, and an output. The two inputs are going to be the numbers we add together. First number, second number, and the sum. Actually, let me make this look a little nicer in spaces. We'll give them all descriptions. Again, these are just the tooltips when you mouse over a property. And we're good. Next column says direction. And if you're a little confused at this point, thinking that we already indicated the direction in this first category column, don't worry. The category can be anything. An output variable. It's a little smart, knows what you want to do. The next column is the type of the property. We're going to change all of these to integers because we're just adding numbers together. But if you want anything more complex, you can go down here to Browse for Types, and you see the exact same type browser that you have in the Variables pane in UiPath Studio. Keep it simple. int. And the last option is whether you want these properties to be required or not. Obviously, if we're making an activity that adds two numbers together, the user will be required to put those two numbers in. An ancillary benefit of this is that all required variables, all required properties will be added to the activity designer automatically. We'll hit OK here, hit finish, and our addition activity will be generated for us. Here we go. So two files that you want to pay attention to here. First is in the activity project, the addition.cs. This is the execution logic, what happens when this activity runs. And then in the design project, you have the designer. Let's go in here first because this is the guts of the activity. This is the heart. And let's see what got generated. You'll see all it is a class that extends one of our default activity classes. We have a list of properties here. First number, second number, sum. First two are in arguments. Last is an out argument. And they're all of type integer. And if you're wondering what all this clutter is, it's actually quite useful. These are the name, the description, and the category that we put in there, and they're all set up to be localized for you. So if you have a translation team, you can just send them the resource file containing these, and it'll all be translated. Up here, we also add the continue on error by default. This is just a useful property that you see in some UiPath activities where if something happens and you just want to skip over, you don't want to halt your entire workflow, you can do that. Properties. Constructor, nothing in there, but if you wanted to add any default values to your properties, you could do it in the constructor. Next up, cache metadata. Cache metadata basically means call this stuff at design time, and we use it for validations. You'll see what happens here is it checks if our inputs, first number and second number, are null, and if they are null, it throws a validation error, which is one of these. And the workflow won't run until these are non-null. And last but not least is execute async. This is the heart of every activity. When you hit run, it comes in here and it executes this code. So what we have here, we first retrieve our inputs, and at the end, we set our outputs. In between, we put our logic. So since this is an addition activity, I'm just going to say var sum equals our first number added with our second number. And I'm going to take that sum and set our output property. And we're done. We have an addition activity. So the logic is done. Let's take a look at the design, or what the activity actually looks like. So here, there's a lot in here, but don't be intimidated by it. The first part is just namespaces. You can ignore this. Second part is some resources, pulls in our themes and some icon converters, and ignore that. This piece here, it's standard with all the activities. It just adds an icon. And this last chunk here, this is what you actually see when you're coming in looking at the activity. We can read it top to bottom. A grid to lay things out, and then our two input properties which were required. They're each composed of a label and a text box. And of course, we fill in all the bindings for you, all the text that has to go in the labels. It's set up. Okay. So last thing I want to do before we build this and see what it looks like in UiPath Studio, I want to show you how to add metadata to your package. If you go back in UiPath Studio and open the Package Manager, you can see all our packages. They have these icons They have nice descriptions, owners, authors, licenses, URLs. How do you set that stuff? Real easy. Double-click the design project, which is the main project here, and you'll see package metadata in this section. Here's a license. It's currently set to Apache. I'll leave it there. The description of the package, which you see in the package manager, I'm going to change to some calculator operations. Author, say our test company. Company, same thing. You could add some tags. I'll say calculator, addition, action, and just so you know, all right, the project URL, I'll leave as that. The icon, here we go. Let's put a nice icon in there. I have one all set. And that's about it. Okay, we have our metadata. Let's build this thing. Let's see what it actually looks like. In order to do that, we again focus on the design project, right-click it, publish. And the first time you do this, it's going to ask, where do you want to publish this? I'm going to go to one of the default local feeds in UiPath Studio, which is program data, UiPath packages. Create that. And we have two configurations here, either release mode, which is what you want to do right before you publish something into the world, on the Connect Marketplace, etc. For now, I'm going to go with debug. The only difference between these two is you can hit publish 1,000,000 times and debug will keep incrementing the package version, whereas release mode, you set a fixed version and it's always going to publish to that one. So hit publish, it's going to build those three projects and then package them up into a NuGet package. We'll just give it a couple seconds here. All right, and we see our three projects were built successfully and our package was built successfully. We go back in here, we see our test code calculator activities, and it has a set version plus a timestamp. This is what I was getting at with that debug mode. It'll keep timestamping them and giving you different packages. Let's go back in here, clean this up a little bit, open our package manager, packages, and here we have our testco activities with an icon, custom one that I set, our description, some calculator ops, owner, author, and those tags that we set. Here we go, iTechGig. We'll install that and see what it looks like. Forgive the speed of my machine. There we go. So now in your activities pane, you'll see there's a new category here, testco. And then within that, calculator. And here we have our beautiful addition activity. With that icon that I had set, with our required fields, first number, second number, the default values, background here, you can see our descriptions, first add-in, second add-in, and they're all bound to the properties pane here. So let's add two numbers together. Let's say 5. When I get out of that, you'll see it's bound over here to the properties pane. Second number still blank, so I have a validation error here because it's required. I'll say 2. The validation errors disappear. And let's get our sum. Sum variable. Now let's display that sum. when I run this, should execute and show us the sum of those two numbers. There we go. 5 and 2, 7. Alrighty. So I'm not sure how much time that took, but it looks like about 20 minutes start to finish with me rambling on. And we have a working activity with a nice icon, some good packaged metadata. That's how you do it. Okay, let's see if there are any questions here. Oh, questions. What do you use for creating custom icons for activities? I use this tool called Icons 8. There's this great company, Icons 8. They have a website where you can go find icons, but I like their desktop app because you can find all these great SVG icons. You can change the colors of them. Just export them. Change the size, but you don't really need to because they're SVGs. A little tough to see this. Is there a way to enlarge this question panel? Okay, here we go. Let's go back up to the top. What is the recommendation message? Is it text, or can we have HTML formatted screen? The recommendation message, meaning when I mouse over this, it's all text. I have tried using password type field, but after typing value, it is not persistent. Could you please guide me, make that type value persistent? I've got a solution that I need to change, design visibility. Need to know how to do that. Oh, I'm guessing this is for the password field that is included in our shared folder here. Where is it? Yeah, our password editor box, which adds a field in here. Let's see if we have one. Yeah, where when you type, it's all obscure. There was a bug in an earlier version where we didn't have the proper editor in here, but we've updated it in, I forget which version. If you download the latest one, it should work. Okay. How do I add checkboxes and drop-downs as inputs? Ooh, good question. So UiPath Studio is pretty smart. It knows that if you have a Boolean value, you probably want that to be a checkbox. So it does that by default. So if in here, I were to change one of these from an in argument of an int to a Boolean, there's a checkbox. If you want a drop down, you would have to add an enum. I don't have any here. But you just go in there and make an enum. Actually, let's see. There's something like that. And then you could add your values. And then pick some enum. And that would show up as a dropdown. How do you create an activity hierarchy within a folder structure in Studio? Okay, if I'm interpreting this right, you're asking about this. The hierarchy is test code calculator by default, but if you wanted to add more, that happens here in designer metadata. You can see here, this is where we aggregate all of our activities. assign them their designers. We can give them a help link where you press F1 on an activity and it opens up a web page to your help documentation. But the first part here is the category. And you can see it's set by default to resources.category. Sorry, I'm just moving the question panel over a bit. That's in this resource file, and you'll see the category is testcode.calculator. If I were to add a different one, say another category, save that, go back here, var, another cat, new category attribute, and we could say resources.category, and then dot resources.another category. Place that in here, and our addition activity would then appear in Tesco calculator blah. Sometimes I get the error array index out of bounds when adding a new activity, defining its properties, and click finish. I'm not sure about that. If you want to ask that on the forum, we could take a look at it. Where do we need to change the owner in package metadata? So there's some different terminology between Microsoft and NuGet. But if you go back in here, you'll see you have author and company, whereas in UiPath Studio, which uses the NuGet terminology, you have author and owner. Company is just owner. Can you please recap on how to create a project once the extension got installed? Yeah. So something that is important to remember here is that all of this is just C# code. We're aiding you by generating some of it, but if you know Visual Studio, if you know C#, you know this. So go up to File, New Project. It's exactly the same. And then UiPath Standard Activity Project. And I say that it's important to impress because whenever there's auto-generated code, I think people tend to believe there's magic happening, and they're hesitant to touch what's been created or experiment. Please experiment. Google and Stack Overflow are your best friends. This is all just C# and WPF code, so you can do a lot more than you think. How can I add a new activity in a package already created before? Oh, easy. It's the same process. You can go back in here and you can add more activities. It's not limited to one go. Custom icons, so we answer that one. Are there tutorials for building more advanced activities? Yes. Let's see, where would these be? There's a tutorial that we went through on building a Google Translate activity, which wraps Google's SDK, and it's a bit more complex. It involves a scope that authenticates and then an activity that actually makes a call to Google Translate. That one, I think, was sent out to you guys. It's a little dated, so we'll be doing another version of that on the 22nd, which is next Friday. So sign up for that one. How can I debug the C# code interacting on UiPath Studio? Oh, good question. Hold on, let me clean this up. So the way I do this, go into debug, step into, back into Visual Studio, debug, attach to process, scroll down, and you'll see UiPath Executor with the name of your process. Double click that, and you'll be in debug mode. show you how it works. Remember the edge. So if you want to debug this, oh, whoops, I didn't save what I had before. Well, you put breakpoints in here. Whoops. And then when you continue in UiPath Studio, it'll stop at those breakpoints. Stop there. How is this different from a UiPath Studio library project? All right. What this person's talking about is you can go in here, create a library project, and then import a Swagger doc, and it will auto-create a whole bunch of activities that wrap API calls. It's a great feature if you have an API and a nice Swagger doc and you just want something quick. But if you're producing something more complex, maybe it doesn't wrap an API, maybe it's some desktop functionality. If you want to be an actual activity producer, publish something on the marketplace, this allows you to have complete control.
Just want to add to that library is also another difference is that with libraries, you can actually develop workflows, XAMLs, and then publish them as activities. So you're right, actually the code behind is made out of existing activities. You're publishing workflows as activities, as opposed to what Dean showed you, where you actually code the logic for a particular activity, like the addition one.
Right. Yeah, good point. If you're more comfortable in UiPath Studio, you can create a workflow with existing activities and then package that up as a new activity. All right. Next question. I always find the if-else activity to be too wide and taking up too much real estate. Maybe this could help in building an if-only activity. I think the Studio X team is actually on that. Mitch or Bogdan, do you know if that's true?
Yes, this is already available and will be soon exposed to Studio as well.
Awesome. That's the best kind of answer. Okay, can I change the data type later from the initial settings? So this is a question we get a lot. If you decided that you wanted to change this activity, and maybe you didn't want integers, you wanted doubles with floating point, can you go back in the wizard and change it? The answer is no. And the reason is that although this is a fairly standard structured format, it's still just code. If you were to go in and change any of this, we would have to then read in this file, hope it's not too different, and then display the existing info in the wizard. We decided that that is far too error prone, and if you're doing this, you should have some familiarity with C#. So what I'd recommend is you either delete this file and the designer file, and then remake it in the extension, or remember, it's just C# code. If you want to change this from an int to a double, you can modify the code here. How can you make the activity display name customizable? Customizable. If you mean by the user in UiPath Studio, they can just come in here and change this to whatever they want. But if you want to, again, change this, then the activity name is up here. So you have your localized display name. It's again in the resources file because this is what's needed for localization. And it's just a dictionary where the key lookup is addition display name. So if I'm going to go here, you can see that the default name of the activity is addition. But I can change this to whatever we want. Can you provide some leads on ideas for activity creations? Me personally, no. I would just say There are a lot of APIs out there, a lot of useful services. Go ahead and wrap them. Activities that wrap APIs are fairly easy. Okay, someone asked again about the checkboxes and dropdowns. Answered that before, which is booleans and enums. Could you please write the icons application you mentioned? Sure. That is icons 8. Icons 8 is the company, and what's the name of the application? Ichon. There you go. If you have extra time, this is off topic, can you discuss the new feature to allow an attended robot to log in a separate session and run while their user continues to operate their PC? Oh, is that the picture-in-picture, or is that the background tasks? I'm not too well versed in that, but maybe Mitch or Bogdan. Talk more
Yeah,
about
sure.
that.
Sure. So this is currently experimental, which means it's not in support for all our customers today. This is important because something that is experimental also means that it may or may not be available in the future. But we are currently working actively working on this to make it widely available and removing the experimental feature. This allows you to run any process either from Studio or from the UiPath Assistant in a separate session. What benefit this gives you is that you can actually work in parallel with the robot that is installed on your local machine. So while the robot can execute that process, you can still continue to use your applications and do your work. This is part of our a Robot for Everyone initiative. So there's a broader story, and you can check it out on uipath.com. We'll be releasing more information about this soon.
Something in a different session. All right, well, that runs. We'll go on to the next questions. What is the best way to learn to use UiPath? Good question. Hold on. Let me exit out of this first. Close that. Best way to learn UiPath is with our free academy. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this, that if you want to go deeper, we have full documentation on how to use this activity creator. We have that same tutorial that we went through today, and a bit more. But you can just search for UiPath Academy, and we have a ton of courses on here that teach you everything basic studio usage to the different roles involved in a center of excellence in an automation department. Okay, someone says, why is the publish option not available in the context menu? The person's asking about is when you right click here, why would publish not be available? So Microsoft made two different types of class libraries. One is the older class library for .NET Framework, and in that case, you wouldn't see publish or pack. You just see build, rebuild, clean. And then they came out with what they call SDK style, which is what you see here. They're almost exactly the same, except there's a publish method. You can open the CS proj just by clicking on this. They list out dependencies a little differently. But if you have the older method, then you won't see that. And you can There are instructions on our help page on how to build those types of projects as well. Here we go. If you go to building activity packages on our help docs, it'll say knowing your project type. It'll say, look, if you have publish in here, that's the SDK style. If you don't, it's non-SDK, and you can see this page instead for how to build that kind of project. If any package is not available in UiPath Studio, how can I get it? Well, keeping to the theme of the webinar, I guess you could build it. Okay. Where can I get C# tutorials and certifications? I guess you just Google C# tutorial. Google's your best friend. As an end user, how easy is it to start using Studio to build basic activities, to learn to start using Studio and build basic activities? I guess that depends on your experience. I tend to think that UiPath Studio is very simple to use, and they're constantly trying to make this easier to the point where people with no programming knowledge, business users, can use it, like Studio X. Building activities, you should really have C# knowledge, because even though we auto-generate a lot of this for you, if you want to make any modifications or customize these things beyond the options we give you, you should know C#. The framework is Windows Workflow Foundation, Windows Presentation Framework. So you can learn all that online, but it requires some knowledge. Can you show the steps under Visual Studio at how you insert UiPath? I'm not sure what this one means. There might be a misconception, again, that UiPath is a component of Visual Studio. Let me clarify. Visual Studio is just a coding environment given to us by Microsoft. UiPath Studio is a separate product. It comes from UiPath. And although it's built on Microsoft technology, it's a different company, different product.
Dean, I think it's about how to install the add-on. It might be about that.
Oh, okay. Sure. We have the add-on hosted on Visual Studio's marketplace. So if you go to extensions, manage extensions, in the online area, you can just search for UiPath and install this one. Good catch. Okay. It looks like that's all the questions.
And that's all the time we had for today as well.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
I would like to thank Dean, Mircea, and Bogdan for a wonderful presentation today. I would also like to thank all our participants for making this webinar a great success. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.